Knowing that Mrs. Millard was afflicted with a heart trouble, good care was taken to break to her as gently as possible the news of her husband's death. It was her sister Louise who taught her, in broken sentences, veiled hints that elicited in half counseling. Her husband's friend Richard was there to near her. It was he who had been in the newspaper office when intelligence of the railroad disaster was received, with Brantley Millard's name leading the list of killed. He had only taken the time to assure himself of its truth by a second telegram, and had hastened to forestall any less skillful, less tender friend in bearing the sad message.
She didn't hear the story as so many women have heard the same. With a paralyzed inability to accept its significance, she wept at once with sudden, wild abandonment in her sister's arms. When the storm of grief had spent itself, she went away to her room alone. She would have no one follow her.
Dea stood facing the open window, a comfortable roomy armchair. Into this she sank, pressed down by a physical exhaustion that haunted her body and seemed to reach into her soul.
She slept with her head thrown back on bed, quite motionless, except when a sob came up into her throat and shook her, as a child who has cried itself to sleep continued to sob in its dreams.
There was something coming to her, and she was waiting for it, fearfully. What was it? She didn't know. It was too subtle and elusive to name, but she felt it, creeping out of the sky, reaching toward her through the sounds, the skin, the color that filled the air.
Now her bosom rose and fell tumultuously. She was beginning to recognize this thing that was approaching to possess her, and she was striving to beat it back with her will. As powerless as her two white slender hands would have been, she abandoned herself. A little whispered word escaped her slightly parted lips. She said it over and over under the breath.
Free, free, free.
The vacant stare and the look of terror that had followed it went from her eyes. They stayed keen and bright. Her pulse beat fast, and the course blooding warm and relaxed every inch of her body. She didn't stop to ask if it were or were not a monstrous joy that held her. A clear and exalted perception enabled her to dismiss the suggestion as trivial. She knew that she would weep again when she was the kind, tender hand folded in death. The face that had never looked safe with love upon her, fixed and grey and dead. But she saw beyond that bitter moment a long procession of years to come that would belong to her absolutely, and she opened and spread her arm out to them in welcome.
There would be no one to live for during those coming years. She would live for herself. There would be no one powerful will bending hers in that blind persistence with which man and woman believe they have a right to impose a private will upon a fellow creature. A kind intention or a cool intention made the act seem no less a crime as he looked upon it in that brief moment of illumination. And yet she had loved him sometimes. Often she had not. What did it matter? What could love, the unsolved mystery, comfort the effects of this possession of self-assertion which she suddenly recognized as the strongest impulse of her being?
Free body and soul, free,
she kept whispering.
Joe, open the door. I beg, open the door. You will make yourself ill. What are you doing, Joe? For heaven's sake, open the door.
Go away! I'm not making myself ill.
Joe replied, Her fancy was running along those days ahead of her, spring days and summer days and sort of days that would be her own. She breathed a quick prayer that life might be long. It was only yesterday she had thought with a shudder that life might be long.
Someone was flew into Louis' room door. It was the soul of her husband. When Maran who entered, he stood amazed at Josephine's piercing cry and asked her to come with him. Jo was led to a cliff by her husband.
Honey, won't you live together with me?
He asked. Jo nodded her head.
Let's jump into this cliff and you've lived with me forever.
Jo jumped herself into the cliff, with no one seen beside her. Finally, she and her husband lived heavenly ever after.